For generations, immigrants have come to the United States carrying more than suitcases. They carried hopes for opportunity, safety, and a future for their families. Most importantly, they carried a story. Some stories began across oceans, others began only a few miles away. But each journey was shaped by the same question: who is allowed to come to America? The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 ultimately provided a transformative and historically consequential answer to that question. As a reaction to decades of discriminatory policy, the law transformed the nation's immigration system and revolutionized who could enter the United States, sparking demographic, cultural, and societal changes that continue to shape the country to this day.
America has at least two original sins. The attempted genocide of Native Americans being one, and the period of slavery being another. And the America we live in today has inherited this complicated history. And it's important to keep it in mind because we should not take for granted the rights of citizenship, because there used to be a time where to be a citizen, to have access to the rights of a citizen, there were conditions. Not anybody could theoretically become a citizen.
People were not judged by their ambition or skills, but by where they were born. Before 1965, immigration law favored certain nations and restricted many others. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act became the first federal law to ban immigration based on nationality. Later laws expanded these restrictions. By 1924, the Immigration Act at the time created the National Origins Quota System, limiting immigration from much of the world while heavily favoring Northern and Western Europe. For millions of people across Asia, Africa, and parts of Southern and Eastern Europe, the doors of the United States were effectively closed. These policies reflected fears about cultural change and long-standing ideas about racial hierarchy. Immigrants, African Americans, and other marginalized groups all faced systemic discrimination during this period, reinforcing barriers in both law and society. But by the mid-20th century, the world was changing, and so was the United States. During the Cold War, American leaders presented the country as a champion of democracy and equality. The post-war era brought the civil rights movement, exposing the contradictions between American ideals and immigration law. Leaders like A. Philip Randolph and groups such as the National Council of Negro Women began advocating for equal rights that extended beyond domestic policy to immigration. In 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act codified a preference system for skilled immigrants and family reunification, but it maintained strict racial quotas. At the same time, the United States was under global scrutiny. Newly independent nations in Africa and Asia criticized American hypocrisy. How could a country champion democracy abroad while excluding people based on nationality at home? These critiques, combined with Cold War concerns about America's image, created political pressure for reform.
It's not that you had members of the civil rights movement like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and others fighting for immigration reform. It's that key leaders understood the connection between them. And so, for instance, in the presidential administration of Lyndon Johnson, those who were advising him said, you know, if we are going to stand for civil rights reform, like the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, it's completely contradictory for us to allow national origin quotas and other forms of kind of very discriminatory immigration policies to stand at the same time.
President John F. Kennedy in 1963 called publicly for the elimination of national origin quotas, framing the debate as a moral and democratic imperative. Civil rights legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had already begun dismantling legal discrimination at home, making the restrictions in immigration law increasingly indefensible. Immigrant advocacy groups, including the American Jewish Committee, the Catholic Conference on Migration, and grassroots Caribbean and Asian communities, pressured lawmakers to act. In 1965, that effort resulted in the Immigration and Nationality Act, also known as the Hart-Celler Act. Signed at the base of the Statue of Liberty, the law abolished the national origins quota system that had shaped immigration since 1924. Instead of favoring certain countries, the new law treated nations more equally and introduced a preference system focused on family reunification, skilled workers, and refugees. Opponents argued that the existing system preserved what they considered America's traditional identity and warned that large increases in immigration could strain jobs, housing, and social services. During congressional debates, several senators insisted that the reform might open the door to immigration on a scale the nation was not prepared for. Despite this opposition, the push for reform persisted, driven by growing demands for equality at home and increasing scrutiny from the international community. The removal of national origin quotas opened new pathways for immigration from regions that had previously been restricted. Immigrants began arriving in greater numbers from countries in Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Families separated by distance and bureaucracy were finally able to reunite.
It ensured their continuation and expansion by placing priority on family reunification as a basis for access to U.S. immigration documents. So it set up something what people sometimes refer to as chain migration, where an immigrant comes and then they can apply for visas for their siblings. And then each of those new family members that come, then they can in turn apply for visas for their family members, both close as well as extended family members.
Communities across the United States began to change. New languages, traditions, and cultures became a part of everyday American life. The numbers reveal how dramatic this shift was. In 1960, nearly 3/4 of immigrants to the United States came from Europe. Within a few decades, that pattern had changed completely. Immigration from Asia and Latin America became the majority of new arrivals.
One more thing about the kind of backstory of kind of family sponsorship in Asians is that there was these kind of small pieces of post-World War II legislation, things like the War Brides Act, which that in itself was not a particularly big population, right? But after 65 started sponsoring their relatives back home. There's these kind of small little pockets of people that increase here and there, and that ultimately has a pretty significant impact in setting into motion this really large demographic transformation.
The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 also influenced future immigration policies. In 1986, the Immigration Reform and Control Act legalized millions of undocumented immigrants while introducing stronger enforcement measures. Later policies, including programs like the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, continued to grapple with the questions raised by the changing immigration system. These debates show how immigration reform rarely happens in isolation. One change often sparks another. The act dismantled a discriminatory system that had shaped immigration for decades and replaced it with a new vision of who could come to America. What lawmakers once described as a modest reform became something far greater. It reshaped immigration patterns, transformed communities, and opened new possibilities for millions of families around the world. Even today, immigration remains one of the most powerful and contested issues in American public life. Across the country, protests, demonstrations, and public discussions reveal how deeply people care about the question of who belongs and how the nation should respond to those seeking a new life. These reactions are not new. They are part of the same historical chain that has shaped immigration for generations. Revolutions in ideas lead to reactions. Reactions lead to reforms. And each reform reshapes the future in ways few people can fully predict. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was one of those moments. It did more than just change a law. It changed the direction of a nation. Today, immigrants shape every corner of American life. From classrooms and hospitals to government offices and neighborhoods, their presence is woven into the fabric of the country. What began as a decision made 60 years ago has grown into a lasting force that continues to shape the American story. And even now, that story is not finished. With every generation, every journey, and every new voice, America continues to decide what it stands for and who will help shape the future still to come.